Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Fulfilled series. Today we have with us a very special guest, Diane Redleaf, Esquire, who is the founder of the Family Defense Center in Chicago and has spent the last 38 years fighting for the rights of children and families. She's written an amazing book that we're going to speak about today, and it is about to come out. It's called They Took the Kids Last Night, and it's about how the child protective system puts families and children at risk. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you, and I want to learn all about your book. What motivated you to write it?
I wrote the book to be a story of what exactly a lawyer does when they defend families in the child welfare system. What are the families facing, and what are they up against in terms of the system and its destructive power? The book is story-based. It's experiences of 6 different families and what the investigations look like and what the court process looks like that it unfolds once a formal decision is made to take the kids.
So Diane, how did you get into this work?
Professionally, I was a legal services lawyer. I went to work for the largest federally funded legal services office for the poor in Chicago, and I just discovered that that particular office did not have a children's or family child welfare focused project, and I was starting to do more and more work in the children's area. So I convinced the executive director to let me start a children's project focused on the child welfare system, which had been getting a pass, basically. Nobody was examining it.
As a physician, we are told in medical school, see something, report it. We are mandated reporters, and if there's any suspicion, we have to report. And apparently that system that we've always been taught and never really been taught to question is something that could put families and children at a great deal of risk.
Ever since 1974, federal law has mandated child abuse reporting, and it's gradually expanded to the point that now 18 states require everyone, not just doctors, not just professionals, to report suspected child abuse. But the problem is people don't know what that means, and they don't know what happens next. And systems are incredibly overloaded. In fact, 10% of all children, the numbers are staggering, 10% of all children are reported to these systems every year. And we expect these systems to sort it out and to never get it wrong, because we don't actually think about what it means to get it wrong. And that's part of what the book is meant to talk about, what it means to get it wrong when you are claiming child abuse and it is not true.
And all the false positives.
All
10%
the false positives.
of children. Abuse does not occur in 10% of families.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we have this huge triage system, and it's a very costly system. We are spending a lot for the reporting of suspicion. In Chicago, there was recently a story of a child who was 8 years old who walked her dog around the block and was called to the hotline because she was alone. So we've gotten to the point of having a very out of control system.
Diane, so a call is made to the hotline. What's the very first thing that happens?
So after the call gets made, somebody takes down the information. They will record an incident that's reported, or maybe there is just information being reported. The case, if it's a case, will be sent to an investigator. So that person then has to make a number of critical decisions. So the question arises, who are these people? These are not experts. And oftentimes they're not even been on that job for very long. There's a high turnover in this field. There's high caseloads in this field. But they are mandated to go try to see the child.
It's decided whether or not the child needs to be removed emergently. If that decision is made, the child goes to one of these places, possibly a family member in the best case scenario, or else to foster care. And that emergent decision is made under the assumption that there is significant abuse going on.
It's supposed to be made under the assumption that there is an emergency and that there is reason to believe the child was abused or neglected by the person that we're removing the child from. So those are, complicated factual questions. And if they had a child who was injured, this sets up a complicated dynamic with the care providers, who are now becoming state witnesses against them. So this is part of what the book delves into in terms of the relationships of the parents and the child to the medical establishment.
And so you're saying that certain doctors have a contract with the state, are paid by the state, and also are needed to render an opinion to the state about child abuse. They're supposed to be objective, but it's the state who pays them, and that is an inherent conflict of interest.
It's troubling when the same people who have contracts to provide opinions are the people that the family has sought care from, because those contracts are not disclosed to the families. So that's extremely troubling ethically.
Given that that is a very, clear conflict of interest, is that even legal to continue when such a conflict of interest exists?
In the various stories that I tell, the abuse conclusion is often reached without it even being logical, without there being a narrative that really supports it. But yet the families had to defend themselves in extensive legal proceedings.
And these are often families who are discriminatorily, essentially disadvantaged.
Yes.
For numerous reasons.
Mm-hmm. So my book goes through cases where the families prevailed. They were exonerated, to show how, even in the clear cases where the family was innocent of what they were accused of, how difficult it is, even when they had resources, how difficult it is. Because the word of the people who the state is listening to is given more credibility by the establishment. So the families, even though innocent, have to mount this extraordinary defense.
Absolutely right. It traumatizes you forever. Let's specifically talk about the cases. For instance, let's talk about the case of Tony and Tiffany, because Tony has indeed gone public with his story. Can you tell us a little bit about the case?
So this is one of the later stories in my book, but it's one of the most compelling. What happened was Tony and Tiffany had been staying at a hotel. Tiffany had a home that was having some treatment done, and they had a birthday party to go to for Tiffany's older child, who was 6 years old at the time. Their younger daughter, April, was 6 months old. They were in a hurry to get to the birthday party. Tiffany takes the luggage to the car. Tony is in the shower right when she leaves and takes the luggage to the car. And the older girl, Veronica, is told to watch your sister. So Tiffany is gone for all of 10 minutes. There's video footage to show this. Tony's in the shower. Well, Veronica turns away from the baby, grabs some lotion, but right as she's grabbing for the lotion, the baby falls off the couch. And Tony comes out of the shower and immediately sees that she's breathing heavily and she's losing consciousness. So he resuscitates her. He does CPR, but he sees some eye rolling, and Tiffany then comes back and she manages to call 911. So the paramedics arrive, they take the child to the ER, and she has some serious signs of head injury, some subdural bleeding, retinal hemorrhaging. So soon, both Tony and Tiffany are arrested, and the hotline is called. Now, what's especially interesting about this story is that Veronica's consistently said this is what happened. Every time she's questioned, the little girl, she says her baby sister fell. She's asked up and down, did your mother hurt you? Did Tony hurt you? No. But the mantra of the child protection system is that short falls don't cause this kind of injury. Some of the child abuse pediatricians have been taught to believe this. So Tony and Tiffany were arrested. The behavior of the police in their story was shocking. Tony was told that his daughter died while he was in police custody. I mean, can you imagine the trauma? Then child protection took over. Neither of them was actually ever charged. They were released from custody, but the child protection system took over. And the child was, she was in a medically induced coma for a while, and the family was told they couldn't see her. Now, child protection actually had no court orders, but they just assumed power in the case to direct the family life of these people. Veronica gets placed quickly with some relatives. Eventually, April gets placed with relatives too. And then the family had to fight their way back. And again, the presumption of innocence really didn't apply to them. There was nobody who said that either of them was a risk. In fact, Tony had founded a youth service agency. He had been in foster care himself, and he had gone on to found a youth service agency where he was mentoring foster youth himself. Tony lost his job very quickly because he couldn't work with children. He lost essentially his career, and yet that was just stripped of him very quickly. For what? For taking a shower. So just because shortfalls often don't cause this kind of injuries, we can't assume that they can't or don't.
There must be case reports where they do.
Yes.
And was that the defense?
Well, the defense was developed that, the shortfall was what Veronica reported all along. She was a witness to it. So, but also, yes, there are reports in the medical literature that document it may be rare, but children have died from shortfalls, and this child did not die, fortunately. She's doing now pretty well.
Thank goodness. Wow.
Thank goodness, yes.
Yeah. It's so interesting what the level of evidence for presumed guilt.
So in the book, I make the case that we need a higher burden of proof at the fact-finding stage in court. The U.S. in most systems allow the adjudication of abuse or neglect to be based on more likely than not, which is the same standard as if you were hit by a car or a slip and fall case. That's the more likely than not standard. But also, the rights of families are supposed to be fundamental rights under our Constitution. So we don't usually treat fundamental rights as subject to this nearly 50-50 balancing. And we believe that family life is essential to our society. So we're not protecting it adequately. I would suggest that we need to understand the trauma of the false positive, and taking that into account, only make the call when there's a reasonable certainty that the call is well-grounded, in fact.
Given your experience, things need to change in order to create a more just system. What needs to happen? What kind of policies are you working to change and implement right now?
So I started a process of dialogue with groups on the right and the left, and out of that came an organization, a coalition that's called United Family Advocates. And we are putting forth a number of policy changes. I think the problem of false positives really needs to be discussed. I think we've been given an opportunity in a way by the tragedy at the border, the terrible trauma that has been visible. People see what it means to separate a child from their parents. Well, it's the same trauma is occurring when a child is taken from their parent and put into foster care.
Diane, how can we be hopeful in this scenario?
So for me, one of the hopeful messages and what I'm hoping to promote through the book is the realization of the importance of good family defense. The network of family defense attorneys has grown enormously in the last 10 years, and it is continuing to improve. What is not the case is it is very poorly supported by both government and private philanthropy. If you compared the child welfare system to criminal justice, and yet child welfare reform is really, really far down the list of priorities. And I think it's equally, if not more important, to focus on this population of children and families because of all the social ramifications for the lives of the children, the lives of the families, and the other systems that are affected by getting this wrong.
Diane, thank you so much for coming and sharing all your work with us. And this is your 38 years of experience protecting families and children. There's no more important work than what you are doing. So thank you so much. And can you please tell us, where can people buy your book, They Took the Kids Last Night?
The book is available on Amazon. It's also available through the publisher, ABC-Clio, and also through my own website, and that's www.familydefenseconsulting.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.